Everybody, it is Mike Young at digitalnomad.net. Welcome. We're going to talk about population decline. Incredible, terrible population decline, and it's real. And just to prove that it's real, let's watch a video by somebody from the New York Times.
And may still assume that we're living in a world where the biggest problem is likely to be overpopulation. So
That's what people
let's
think.
start out when we talk about declining fertility. And
Okay, so we're talking about declining fertility. So many people. I grew up in the 70s and 80s. I'm 55 years young, and I was taught that we're not going to have enough resources for all the people. And I grew up in a kind of liberal environment, and that's the liberal mantra, I suppose. So the conservative mantra of the uneducated, apparently, that's if you believe all that. And by the way, I'm apolitical. I just kind of laugh at all this. So it's very interesting to analyze a video here put out by somebody at the New York Times, obviously an extremely liberal publication on population collapse.
population decline, what do we mean?
Okay, so fertility is collapsing everywhere all at once, perhaps with
Wow.
the exception of sub-Saharan Africa, where rates are still very high. But across Latin America,
Okay, sub-Saharan Africa, Denise and I visited there in December. We're going again. Check out the Health Optimization Safari at healthoptimization.safari.org. Excuse me, if you want to join us. But yeah, we're going to Uganda, highest fertility rate in the world. The average woman has 6 children in her lifetime, and most places cannot even stay above replacement rate. And you'll find out what that is. I think it's like 1.8, something like that, too.
the Middle East, North Africa, and all those trends are going sharply downwards. And, economically, this has catastrophic implications
You
for
can imagine.
middle-income countries because as you have an aging population, then older people typically have lower rates of labor force participation. They're less economically productive. It's the young people who are, innovative,
Young,
productive,
55
starting
years
up
young.
new companies. But as the entire economy ages, then it becomes.
I know Elon Musk got a lot of flack about saying how the U.S. Social Security system is broken. And of course, you may or may not know they've hardly ever, I don't know, let somebody comment down below. Do they allow you to even invest in equities, meaning stock market, stocks and stuff like that? I don't know. It used to be that you had to have more people coming in. It was a Ponzi scheme, basically, that's about to collapse. And if population collapses and there's no new kids, and keep in mind, I'm trying to keep this, it's not political. This is just reality. Most conservative families are large, most liberal families are small. So you know where the population issue is. And that's why it's so ironic that we're watching a video here from the New York Times.
Becomes more sluggish, and those younger people, either through savings or taxes, need to pay for elderly healthcare or pension costs or provisions. And that then creates a massive fiscal squeeze because governments or individuals need to spend a higher amount of their money given those rising dependency rates. And if we're concerned with things like, climate change mitigation, the governments just won't have enough money to spend on extra costs if you're spending more on old people.
All right, okay, so you get the idea, right? If population collapse is actually happening, it's going to create a perfect storm of a downward spiral, and the young people who have traditionally always needed to be there, and I guess we'll have to get into this because what about AI? What about robots? Can't they take care of old people for free? I don't know if we'll get into that in this video or not, but she's saying, at least from her sense, all right, and you'll find out, I think, a little bit of her background as we go through this video, that this is going to be a massive problem if population decline is actually happening.
And on top of this, if younger people are saving more, as they are in China, then they're going to be spending less. So that has a knock-on effect on the entire economy.
And when did you become interested?
Okay, and so you get that? If saving more, they're going to be spending less. Well, that's what's happened. Think about how things have changed in the United States. It used to be you worked at one job for 30 years. You got your defined benefit, meaning X number of dollars per month for the rest of your life, retirement plan that you didn't even have to contribute to. So anything extra you had during your working years, you were just spending, right? Now, people don't even know how they're going to survive because the Social Security system is probably on the verge of collapse. May not last more than another 10 years, maybe. Let me know what you know about that in the comments. But the thing is, there's a lot of uncertainty. So you're not going to spend any money either on the spend side. That's going to implode the economy.
In the fertility crisis, you started out working on gender equality, the socioeconomic status of women in developing countries. How did this issue, which I should say, it has long been the province of,
There you
to
go.
be kind to ourselves, right-wing cranks, right? How did
Right-wing
this
cranks.
issue become a big part of your focus?
So I think fertility and women's choices and men's choices about how many children they want, that's always come up in my interviews because I'm always interested, what do you want to do for your life? So I've got so much data on this going back for the past 15 years. When I was in Zambia, women would always encourage me to have another baby. Oh, you must have a baby. You must
Yeah, there you go. So she was in Africa doing work.
have a baby. That was so imperative for them.
This is what I
To
say to my colleagues too. So it's, it's not just Zambia.
And
so
that's interesting. See, he's someone working for the New York Times, and he's telling his colleagues to have kids.
I was constantly pestered. And then I think in
Oh, one
East
thing I want to add in here while I'm thinking about it, top of mind, what I see, and let me know if you agree or disagree in the comments here, is that almost nobody's having kids, at least definitely not at the replacement rate that I see, unless you're talking about sub-Saharan Africa, like we said, and we were there. It's like the baby boom generation. It's like the 1950s in the US all over again over there. It's a totally different vibe. But everywhere else, the only people that are really having kids, like in actual decent numbers to replace the population, are the very, very poor and the incredibly wealthy. I think people in the middle, as you know, the middle class has vanished. They just opted out.
Asia, in South Korea, where I was looking at the data so intensely and I was having so many of my interviews and I just realized it was so omnipresent. And then I looked at the data more broadly. So I think going to South Korea is really what fertility pilled me, so to speak.
Right.
Okay, South Korea is the epicenter of population decline. I think they have a replacement rate of like 0.7, something like that. Yeah, so we'll find out about that.
And a country like South Korea has a fertility rate of 0.7,
There you go.
right? That means that over the course of 2 generations, the population goes from 50 million to what, 20 odd million? Let's say 15 to 20 million. Does that sound right?
Yeah,
I'm just trying to give people a sense
or
that when we
more.
talk about with the numbers we have now, when we talk about the reason you use a term like population collapse is we aren't talking about a kind of gentle slide from, to above replacement fertility to slightly below replacement fertility, where you need to adjust the retirement age so that people stay in the workforce 5 years longer. You're talking about cities being empty, buildings standing empty,
Imagine that.
economies
Wow.
grinding to a halt.
And also think about this too. We've seen a lot of population migration in the United States. There's been a lot of places that, well, initially it was just for quality of life, moved south. Now they're moving north because of costs. But there are still places that have been totally left out in these migrations that have been going north south here and there based on the real estate market. And those places, I mean, they're going to turn into ghost towns. I think some places will still be successful, but others, if this actually comes true, will just be ghost towns.
And just seeing a country that has gone furthest
Yes,
down this
absolutely.
road. Yeah.
And you see it in Italy too. For example, when you get off the train in Rome, you see the
Yeah, Italy is, they give you incentives to show up and buy houses. I think maybe even start families too. A lot of places, even in the United States, West Virginia has incentives to move to the state. And actually, the US, believe it or not, and me looking into all this, also does have some of the best ongoing incentives from a tax perspective. Not only cutting your taxable income, but actually paying you over time. If you have enough kids to offset all your taxable income, you can actually get paid in the US. So the US actually, believe it or not, has the most generous, I believe, tax incentives in the existing tax system, not just like a baby bonus, which has been used recently, but I'm just talking about just ongoing payments while they're under 18.
pet store rather than the kids store.
No,
It's glaring.
we took our family to Rome and we're trying to find a children's store. And it turned out that there was an important children's chain that had closed a bunch of its places. And but also, when I traveled around Italy, like the hill towns are empty, right? The rural areas are aging and emptying. The big cities, people move there, and so they stay densely populated, even if they're
Okay, now I think that this is kind of getting into politics, if you ask me, because obviously liberal areas are more urbanized. So he's saying, hey, don't worry, urbanized areas are fine, but those country areas, they're going to be gone, as if liberal people will be reproducing and conservative people won't. which is we know the exact opposite is happening. I don't know. Maybe this is just wishful thinking on his part. Let me know what you think.
They're having fewer kids. And so this can actually end up being kind of invisible, right? In an interesting way, because if you're in the big city, there are more people there than ever, right? And so you you think to yourself, well,
In certain
how can there
cities,
be
others have
how
been
can
left
there be a
behind.
population
Yeah, I mean,
crisis?
totally. I would say one more thing. I suppose one aspect of me as a sort of social scientist is I teach on international development. So I'm very interested in economic outcomes and how we can all become richer, the sort of abundance idea. But I also study culture. So it's the interconnection between all these economic consequences of our cultural choices.
So okay, why is this happening?
Why? Here it
Right?
is, the
And
why.
just before you tell us, I think it's safe to say everyone
The
has a sort
oracle.
of particular pet theory, right? So if you talk to people on the political left for a long time, they would insist that it's just a problem of the provision of public.
Okay, this is where I think this is the intersection here of the issues with, I'd say, men in society, the dating crisis, uh, women who are no longer going to have any children. Some of these are videos that I have been posting over the last few years as I've been discovering all this, because so much of this has happened just in the last 5 years. Denise and I, my wife, were talking, and I was saying, well, if you go back 5 years ago and anybody was talking about any of these things, you know, that I just mentioned, and the population crisis, people would think you were insane.
Services, right? And they would say, the developed world just needs to become more like Scandinavia in terms of paid leave and parental support.
Benefits.
People on the right, conservatives, are more likely to talk about the decline of religion and a sense of moral obligation to the future. You have people who focus right now, especially in developed countries.
And if just to kind of get my thing in there, because this is obviously taken as a political issue to so much of society. You know, if you're liberal, Democrat, you give out free shit, meaning benefits for people that have to have more kids. If you are conservative, it's like no free shit. Republican, no free shit. And that's my quick political thing. And you can tell why I'm not into politics. So in this issue, yeah, there are incentives, and there should be incentives in a way, I think, if you want to see kids, if this is a real crisis.
On climate change and say, oh, the young people don't want to have kids because they're afraid of the human future.
Some
And you'll
are,
have people who say, look, this is just about women's choices, right? This is just,
yeah, and
and
that too.
once you have a more egalitarian society, women understandably are less likely to choose to have kids. And this is where we end up.
Well, the thing is, we're going through a couple generations now after birth control. And I think that people have had a great time, okay, as adults. But at some point, a lot of people say, well, oh shit, what am I going to do? I want to have kids. But now all of a sudden, that intersects, that's only some people, okay? Only some people like that. But that intersected with this population crisis is it creates a very pressing issue.
And all of these arguments have problems. And as it's hard to fit them all to the general trend, right? And especially since even places like Scandinavia have sort of headed towards the cliff in recent years, generous benefits and all. So
And so he's saying that even these benefits, countries with benefits, they're not seeing the results that they wanted. The reason why they created the benefits in the first place, they're not seeing the results. It's just not working for some reason.
what is your master theory of all of this?
So let me add on the Scandinavia point. Left wing progressives may say, oh, Scandinavia is so family friendly. There's universal
I
childcare.
hear
It's
it all the
easier
time.
to be a working mother.
Why can't the
But
US be
actually,
like
the
them?
US has higher fertility,
Hmm.
right? So that signals to us that, that theory isn't working. And as for the theory that it's all about women's.
I also think that there needs to be a balance here, a balance of everything. And I think, at least for right now, the US has a better balance in comparing those two places.
Choices and liberalism, how can that explain why fertility is crashing in Egypt, in Tunisia, in Turkey, and in Tamil Nadu, which remain.
I'll explain, because everyone wants to be like Americans, and they're seeing that it's crashing over here, and so it's going to be happening everywhere. I can't believe that sub-Saharan Africa is still out of this. But when Denise and I went over there and visited, we actually gave a talk at an event, a public
Very
event,
conservative.
and I said, "Don't be like Americans. Do not. Don't be like Americans." I say the average American is not even quote unquote happy in addition to all this, but that's another subject.
So something is happening very recently, maybe in the past 15 years, everywhere all at once,
Hmm.
across vastly different economies, across
Hmm.
vastly different governance and wealth.
Oh, and by the way, but there are certain areas like Sub-Saharan Africa, where it's not, and I think she'll get into why, and you'll see how this is all connected. Oops, sorry.
Welfare systems
There
and
we go.
across vastly different levels of liberalism versus religiosity. Those theories that you mentioned seem to do a poor job of the sort of comparative analysis in the very recent global plummet. And going back to Sweden, for example, what there has been
Oh,
in
and let me give you a preview, okay, of I think what she's going to say. What's happened with the dating crisis? The dating crisis is that because of social media and dating apps, everyone sees everyone who's out there. And everyone sees also all these Instagram models and everything else, and they all kind of want to be the same thing. So everyone wants to date the same person, especially from a female to male perspective, which I've done some videos on. You have to have all the sixes: 6 feet tall, six pack, and six-figure income, which I think is now at least $250,000 a year. So what do you think? That has reached a tipping point of a crisis, the dating crisis, because of the internet and social media. And what does the internet and social media do? What's it infamous for? It's for creating depression, because you look at everything online, half of which or more is fake, probably 80% is fake, in my opinion. And everyone wants the same thing. So in the dating market, like 5% of guys get all the dates and everybody else is miserable. That's a separate subject. But let's listen to what she has to say.
the very recent years is a massive, massive rise in singles. Hugely. There are more people living in single occupier households, and this reflects a
Mhm.
global trend.
So this rise in singles, you frame it as a kind of crisis of coupling, right?
Mm.
So can you define that crisis for me and why it's, in your view, the leading explanation for
So people are staying alone without a significant other, without pairing up. And we haven't even gotten to the real robot girlfriend or anything else thing. So if this is real, it's only going to keep getting worse, at least in the short term.
the larger trends we've been talking about?
Absolutely. So, if we look empirically at the data for a range of countries, we find that increasing number of people are staying single. That is, they are neither married nor cohabiting. So, in the US, over half the people between 18 and 34 are neither cohabiting nor married. So, they're single.
So that's mostly 20s, right? Okay. Single. And think about this. I just want to give you my little, insider view. What's happening with the guys is they are in incels and or smartly waiting, okay, until they can raise their value in the dating market. The women, they actually peak at 21, 22, but they're focusing on their careers because the women are doing way better than men in terms of college education and high paying careers.
And that's the same case in much of Latin America, East Asia, Korea, in China, in South Korea. Those rates of I chat to all my Chinese students. Many single, no expectations, no plans, no desires to be married. So that's a massive, massive global friction. So if
Another thing is they've witnessed the horrific example of relationships, whether they stayed married or not, and of course, the super high divorce rate. And just because somebody stayed married, don't think that they like it. And this is what everyone's watching. Okay, so it's a very very poor example, and now they have options, right? But they can find their perfect person potentially, which everyone wants to date. So your chances of getting that person and keeping them are like slim to none on all sides. And then the robot girlfriend thing coming up, or boyfriend.
people are staying single, that is closely correlated. If we look at the data, the decline in people being married or coupled is almost 1-to-1 with the decline in children. It matches so closely in both the
Mm,
US and China, everywhere.
interesting.
This is the strongest correlate. It's more closely correlated than anywhere else and across multiple countries. The data is so strong.
So the
Mm.
coupling crisis writ large seems to be linked somehow to technology, right?
Yes, that's what I think.
There you go.
Certainly. So I think we can say, there could be locally specific factors that go on in each place. Each place has its own cultural idiosyncrasies, and I don't want to ignore that. But yes, absolutely. The big shock that's occurred everywhere all at once is we've seen vast improvements in personal online entertainment. So we know, for example, in
Personal
the US,
online entertainment.
podcasting, I mean,
yeah, all
everyone,
these
everyone's
charismatic
just,
podcasters.
that's right.
So people are spending more. No, but I think that's the thing. I mean, no offense, Ross, but I do blame charismatic people like you. If people want
Okay, so charismatic people like Ross. But I'm standing up. Okay, I encourage people to keep moving. Don't just sit and be a hermit while you're consuming your content. Don't consume it all the time. Yeah, interact with people. But yeah, this is a serious issue because you have high quality digital entertainment like this channel that hopefully you subscribe to. And by the way, I'm linking this talk down below. There'll be a link if you want to click through and watch the whole thing. So, and I'm a subscriber too. So, although I didn't ever think I would subscribe to a channel like this, I don't know. I figured it would be so biased politically. I tend to stay away from anything with political bias. But again, this is a super interesting, I think, dive into. I mean, if the New York Times is saying this has got to be happening.
socialize the listeners.
This is a new podcast. It's played no role at all yet.
Oh, okay. You protest your innocence. Okay.
In distracting the young people of America.
Oh, okay.
I wonder how new
totally
it is. I don't even know.
Okay, but we do have this big increase in personal online entertainment, whether it's watching shows on Netflix, sports bets, online gambling has become absolutely massive across Brazil and Latin America more broadly. You can go on Pornhub. Online connectivity enables people to stroll on Instagram, play Call of Duty, World of Warcraft. So we're all becoming, it's not just, being single, we're all retreating into this digital solitude. And I think that's partly because
So we're retreating into the matrix, I suppose, into the real matrix. If you ever watched that movie, Denise and I watched it again recently, and that could be what's happening. I don't know. It's interesting. It's like the humans don't care about themselves anymore. They're so immersed in the dopamine hijack that's taking place on the actual matrix that it is sucking. You've heard of testosterone levels going down, I mean, it is just removing all motivation to interact with other humans in the actual real world.
Technology makes it nicer and easier to stay at home. You can work from home, and some of these apps are so hyper engaging that you sort of get distracted by the constant stream of dopamine hits as each app, as each technology company competes against others to keep its users hooked. And effectively, the tech is out competing personal interactions. That's my fear.
And that holds then as a global explanation because even though there's tons of variation in internet access and so on, smartphone penetration is a global phenomenon, right? You go to India and Africa and you find...
Yes, that's something that we noted when we were over in Uganda, is we brought our smartphones, but then they had some service, but it was so poor. So poor. I mean, the best thing you could do is send a text to somebody and hope that eventually it went through and eventually you receive the reply. But it was tough to make a voice conversation. It was nearly impossible to surf the web. And I kept thinking, I'm like looking at how happy everyone is. Everyone's happy over there. Everyone's interacting with everyone. Everyone's having children. Everyone's in shape for the most part because they're walking around. They don't have cars and stuff. Hardly anybody has cars. A lot of people have motorcycles, but not a huge amount of people. And it seems like most people were walking and not on their devices. They were talking. They weren't holding something in their hand, staring at it like a zombie everywhere they went. I know everyone looks the important face or whatever it is, that look that they have when they're looking at their device. But nobody, I mean, everyone was smiling over there and happy. And I could go on and on. And, you can join us if you want to see what that looks like. healthoptimizationsafari.org.
People with smartphones.
And there's the big difference that sub-Saharan Africa has much, much lower rates of smartphone penetration.
Right. So as the iPhone moves,
and it's interesting. It's interesting because I think so many people have said, "Oh, we need to cure the digital divide. The poor are going to be left behind." Remember that? It wasn't even that long ago. And now we go over there because they say Latin America is even affected by this. We go over to Ecuador too, and it's not the same because of the effect of westernization on Latin America and the influence of the United States, and everyone wants to be like Americans and all that. And then you go over to Africa, sub-Saharan Africa in Uganda, where we've been, and it's just it's great. That's why I told people, don't be like Americans. And this digital divide, we all thought it was a bad thing. Did we really think it was so bad? Are these poor people all left behind? I mean, it sounds like all the non-poor people, the non-super poor people, are going to either never make it financially in the US, or they're going to just everyone else aside from them will die off. And that sounds like a very, very uh, depressing outlook on life right now.
Across sub-Saharan Africa, you would expect fertility rates to fall. But so how much of this, so you've just been talking about distraction, right? Entertainment,
Yes.
right? That
Yes.
it's easier to play a video game than go to a bar.
Of course, let's get everyone's attention spans. The dopamine hijack has ruined people's attention spans. Okay. And so now their attention can only go over to that short form content. And by the way, thank you for watching this long form content and concentrating and watching all the way to the end till we get to the point of what we're trying to say here. And of course, subscribing to the channel, because I don't mind these long form videos. I hope you can pay attention. Stay with this channel on these long form videos to practice paying attention. I'd say that the short attention spans that have hijacked everyone is epidemic. And like I said, I think that's a contributing factor in this fertility crisis. But you can train your mind, even if you never knew, because you were raised on these devices, like the youngest generation, Gen Z, or Gen Alpha. You can still train your mind. You just practice and you will get better.
Bar, it's easier to do sports gambling at home than, meet a nice lady in a broad-brimmed hat at the racetrack, as one does. But how much of it is distraction per se, in your view, and how much of it is a sort of, you might say, like digital segregation of men and women, where men and women aren't just going
Digital
online,
segregation,
but they're going online in sort of distinct ways and not interacting with each other?
And another factor here is that another trend that's going on right now is that men are just fed up with women, a lot of men, and are not even dating women anymore. And I think that's only going to get worse. If that continues, it's only going to get worse with the robot girlfriends and everything else too. But let's hear what they have to say.
That's true. But I totally agree that in person you get when I think that male-female friendships are a really important driver of gender equality, because as you come to care about someone as a friend, as you listen to their stories, as you hear about how their day was or the kind of things they don't like, and they say, hey, I was interviewing this guy in Catalonia in Spain, and he was telling me that they went to watch a football game at the bar, and the women were saying that they didn't like it when guys were rowdy or aggressive, or when one of his female friends was approached by a guy and she said no to him, he called her a puta, he called her a whore or something. And she was saying to her friend that was distressing. She didn't like that. And because he cared about his friend, he sort of understood that and he empathized that and he moderated his own behavior. And I think that building trust, rapport, understanding.
Okay, I also think that they're kind of tapping into the idea of the manosphere here. The manosphere being a truly toxic, potentially anyway, if you believe everybody, way of men gathering on the internet, which would not include any females. And she's talking about the value of humans interacting, men and women in friendship relationships, and I agree with that.
Of what offends, or not even just offense, but having a sense of what matters to the other person. Certain, I absolutely agree that retreating into these digital spaces of solitude, it harms our understanding and also our solidarity more broad. Whether we care.
I wouldn't call it solitude, though. I would say that you're doing nothing but getting constant dopamine hits. It's anything but spending time in solitude. Spending time in nature would be great. So I just be careful with the way you describe that, or the way she does.
About other people, right?
Right. Well, no, and that's one of the distinctive features of current politics around the developed world, certainly, is some kind of polarization of the sexes, right? Where,
Sure.
And it was, I think,
you got the blue pill, red pill, which of course came from the Matrix. You got black pill, but there's definitely polarization of all kinds, the war between the sexes, the political wars, etc.
Less extreme in the end in the most recent U.S. election than some people had
There you go.
anticipated. But I wonder too if there's sort of a feedback loop here, right, where the sexes don't interact.
But that's the thing. Okay, there are echo chambers everywhere nowadays. You may be seeing this through your algorithm of YouTube on your feed because it's reinforces your own personal echo chamber, which is why everyone thinks they're right about everything, and they keep hearing from only one side of certain issues, which is why I try to stay out of politics. So my feed is full of both sides, you know, and it's just something to keep in mind.
And therefore are more likely to sort of like marriage and relationships are themselves a moderating influence
Totally. I really
in an
believe that.
interesting way, right?
I definitely believe that.
And so
Yes.
people don't
Yeah. If you're in a marriage, if you're in a actual real world in-person relationship, you have to work at that. That's actual work. You have to finesse a lot with that. You have to compromise. And if you're in your online echo chamber, like I'm telling you, everybody is in their online echo chamber, even if they don't realize it, including you watching this. You need to be super careful. AI is so smart now, it has tricked you into thinking that you don't have an online echo chamber when you actually do.
have that influence, and then they go online, and like if you are, if you're on social media, right, where people are always
Now, here's the other facet is the keyboard warrior concept, where you will type like a keyboard warrior, boom, 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 and you will type and say things to people that you would never, ever say to their face with words in the real world. You'd never do that.
sort of performing their politics. And you see a lot of liberal women or a lot of conservative men sort of performing their politics.
Oh, for sure.
It's and those aren't
Some
your politics, right? And you have
some accounts are just nothing but that. And I'm talking personal accounts, like all day, every day. Again, to everyone believing they're right, no matter what angle they're coming from.
no relationship to those people. It just seems a lot easier to sort of create a kind of hostile generalization about right-wing men or left-wing feminists, right? Than if you're having any kind of interpersonal face-to-face interaction.
I think that's all true, and I absolutely agree that intimate partnerships are a major important factor for building mutual understanding, common ground, etc. That said, I don't think this is just about men not understanding women, a sort of men from Mars, women from Venus story, because
Right?
if you look at some modern trends, say, for example, the discourse of secular monks, whereby a guy will spend, a young American man will, I'm going to eat these specific macros. I'll have 200 grams of protein. I'll spend, 2 hours on the bike. That's a guy with no friends. That's a guy who's prioritizing, optimizing his physique, and he's not strengthening, and he's not building friendships. He's not building rapport. He's not becoming a funny, charismatic guy. So this isn't just the gender issue. It's a solitude issue of people losing their
Okay, when she says solitude, it's more like antisocial, I would suppose, or at least from a traditional social standpoint. But you also got to consider, and I don't think they mention it at all in this video, the difference between introverts and extroverts. It used to be like I'm an introvert. Okay, first of all, Denise is an introvert. And I used to have a super hard time doing anything growing up in the 70s and 80s. It was nearly impossible to be an introvert. If you were an introvert then, you got nothing done, okay? And by the way, I'm not an alpha or beta male, just I'm a sigma male, and you can look that up if you and I got some videos on that. But nowadays, if you're an introvert, since everyone's connected and everyone's in the matrix all the time, you can live a full, fulfilling life. So in a way, it's incentivizing being an introvert, where in the past, when I was growing up, it was definitely an incentive to your being an extrovert was incentivized, and we have switched. The pendulum has swung in the other direction now.
capacity, losing the social skill to charm and make friends. And if you don't
Having
have
game.
a network that is socially active, then even if you wanted to go out, no one is. And so it's all
That's true.
it's all reinforcing, right?
And so what about economic forces besides the smartphone, right? So digital life has entered into a world where young men are falling behind young women in education. men with lower levels of education are having, I think, a
Yeah, I mentioned this earlier.
particularly hard time finding a mate or pairing off. If you look at trends,
Okay, now remember, I have some long form content on this that I did in the last 2 weeks since I started this up. About men, and I say they're being forced to be incels, really men in their 20s. But that's okay. It's not like a reason to get depressed. That's your time to kind of put your head down and kind of go in the matrix, I guess, and kind of build whatever you're going to build and work on yourself and be able to, if you want to have a family, support a family when the time comes. Because by the time 35 rolls around, the women are way ahead in their 20s, but again, they're also not having kids. They're concentrating on their careers or their school or some combination of that. And the average guy, just school isn't set up for men in general. It never really has. And women have, in the last 10 or 20 years, super realized that and are now leading men for sure.
at least in the US, for marriage rates. College educated women, marriage rate is down a bit. Women without a college degree, the marriage rate is way down, right?
Yes, totally.
And so one way to
Women without a college degree, the marriage rate is way down. I don't know why.
look at this is that,
If you know why, let me know in the comments.
men are losing a certain kind of status. They care about status, right? When they lose status, they become more.
Okay, another facet of this, with what he's saying, men are losing status. What's happening, I say, with a lot of people in the last few generations, and I'm slowly understanding this more every day, is that there's been a lack of positive male role models in families and in child raising. And just look at elementary school, it's almost all female, definitely a lack. It is only getting worse as there are more and more of a higher percentage of kids that are being raised in single parent households, and they're almost all exclusively women. So there's definitely an issue, and this is causing other unintended consequences. And I do think it's probably related to this fertility crisis.
More sexist, more hostile to women, become less attractive to women by virtue of being hostile. That's one way to look at it, right?
Certainly, I think we can.
Okay, men less attractive to women because of being hostile. They're on. This is I would say this is the traditional liberal narrative about men are getting angry, toxic masculinity, and it's because women are succeeding and they got to stop being jealous or whatnot. I don't think that's what's going on. And as I mentioned earlier, I think that what needs to happen is that men just need to take it slow. Men don't have the same fertility window as women. Women pretty much run out at 35. Men can have kids till like 75 potentially, although really more likely 60, okay, as a cutoff date. And that needs to be taught to people because it just needs to, because it's part of this fertility crisis, it's part of this population downward spiral, because the women who are succeeding in the 20s are neglecting to have kids during that most fertile and highest quality, least amount of problems with your baby time. And then by the time they want them, they're going to have all kinds of problems with their kids that they would never have if they had them in their 20s, just based on stats alone. And they're more attractive from a dating perspective when they're younger too. It's just it's all messed up. I hope they get into that, but they may not here.
Think about this in two ways. So, certainly, as women increasingly enter the labor force and get higher skills, then they can be more economically independent and they can choose to be alone. So they would only marry if a guy is charming. If they have.
Oh, more than charming, hypergamy. Okay, they only want to marry up. They want to marry across or up, more likely up. Men are across, which is fine, or down generally. So women are finding, since they're doing way better than men their age, that they have almost nobody. Okay. And the older generations of men, they already had their families early. This thing about men waiting to 35, 40 to even start looking, what I'm talking about, I think that's the new way it's going to be. I'm just predicting a future trend. And then they're going to be marrying the women who start off and realize, yeah, they can still have a career, I suppose, but they also want to have kids more.
Find
And
love.
they'll have them and get married very early. And that's going to be, I think, the new family of the future.
But of course, the phones may be hurting that. Or if the guy offers a desirable package of goods, whether that's attractiveness, entertainingness, or money. right? Money is impressive for many of us. So I think that the most
Hypergamy she's
disadvantaged
talking about.
guys
Got to have
certainly
more
may
money.
struggle to offer an
And
appealing
actually, let me say, not all women need to do that. Not all women do that, but almost all women do that. That's the problem.
package. And as you rightly say,
Well, also because they see it all over the internet. So they're like, oh, everybody else has this. Of course, I have to have this too.
the marriage rates are plummeting, chiefly among the most disadvantaged men. Is the men who are earning least, who are most likely to stay at home with their parents, to be single, who can't necessarily offer an attractive package.
Right, but those men, as I'm saying, they need to be taught early on. You just need to work, do whatever you're going to do, anything, make a decent life for yourself, and don't even start looking till you're 35 or 40. Do you understand what I'm saying? Let me know in the comments if you believe it. They're not saying this. I've said this in some of the content I've put out. I do believe that that's the solution here.
Of goods. I should just say that it's not entirely that young men are getting less educated, rather that the most disadvantaged men are struggling in education. So I certainly think that aspect is partly.
Remember, men have a way longer fertility window. She's not mentioning that. All right. I don't know why she's not mentioning it because she claims to be an expert here, but that is definitely a very big part of this, unless you're going to assume that everyone needs to pair up with people of the same age.
About economics.
And what do you think a man is supposed to do in this kind of situation, right? Because on the one hand, there clearly is a male reaction to this sort of economic landscape that's very toxic, sort of anti.
They're like Andrew Tate and whatnot. They're saying it's toxic, of course, because it's from a liberal publication. It's not necessarily, depending on how it's handled. They keep sticking to the assumption that everyone's going to be the same age that both male and female are going to be about the same age when they conceive this child.
Female misogynist lashing out, right? At the same time, there's a cultural script that says it's really good for women to be independent. You don't need a man, right? And women still like male status, right? It's not just men who want status. Women like it. Like there's a lot of data on women like the idea of having a man who can potentially earn more than them, right? Who can be a breadwinner, maybe not all the time, right? But if you're going to have kids, it's nice to have a man around, right?
But that's if the woman wants to stay at home, and many women do. So those women are going to have to decide early. That's what I'm saying. The women need to be taught to decide early that you need to find someone soon if you want a high quality person. Because if you wait too long, your value in the dating market goes down. You're not going to get the guy you want, which means you probably will never reproduce unless you freeze your eggs. And if that's assuming you want to reproduce. I'm talking about the people that want to. I think a lot of people are getting trapped here because they weren't taught this. The women weren't taught, hey, work on yourself. Know what you want to do with your life. If it's having kids, start looking early. Take care of yourself, be mature. Don't mess up this opportunity, because once you're 22, it's just all nothing but downhill for your value in the dating market. Now, men need a different message, right? I'm saying they need to say, wait, be patient, wait, work on yourself, find yourself, do what you want to do. Take that time to build up some net worth, and then 35, 40, then start looking.
Who can be the primary earner for a period of time, right? So it's not that women are really excited to enter into relationships with men who have less education than they do, or who earn less than they do,
Totally,
right?
totally.
So those men are in a kind of trap that isn't just created by their own sort of sense of masculine identity. It's also created by women's preferences.
Okay, again, it's not a trap if the men are taught early so they don't get depressed. There's a huge male suicide rate, much higher in their 20s, because of what they're talking about. You can imagine, because the men aren't taught this. Someone needs to tell them this. Hopefully, share this with somebody that can benefit from this, because I'm making this content because it doesn't seem like anybody else is talking about it from this perspective.
100%, and created by the broader economic structures.
Open-ended question. What can bring the sexes back together?
So I think that if it's the case that technology is the major friction, then we need to look at the political economy, because each tech company, to be successful, they want to distract us and hoover up our attention for as long
Of
as
course.
possible, for as much as
And they're all giant corporations. And guess who runs the world? Giant corporations. So I don't see how you're going to take away this dynamic. And if you don't believe me, well, who pays all the lobbyists to write up custom laws that benefit their specific corporation? The corporations, because the corporations have all the money. So the corporations run the government. I know it would be considered, some form of fraud or deception or worse, but that's how the U.S. government is run.
as possible. So the market mechanism is really against coupling. And my concern is
For
that
sure.
tech companies are just becoming so much more
Yep.
engaging, more affable, more
Good point.
charismatic, more shocking. Enjoy, Mr.
Yeah.
Beast. Oh, what's he going to do now?
And they're using AI to fine tune all this to continue to capture your attention, because every time they capture more and more of your attention and you don't let it go, they earn more and more money.
Wow, that's so engaging, right? So my concern is that, what if tech outcompetes our social connections?
Yeah,
And that
for
already seems to be
sure.
happening,
It's
not
already
just in
happening.
coupling, but the
Already
wider
happening.
rise in solitude. And so I honestly don't know the answers, but here are a couple of things we could do. One is we could think about, how do we regulate technology in some way? So Jonathan
Oh my
Haidt
gosh.
has really done fantastic.
The regulation has been a good idea. Let's go back to the early days of AI, like 10 years ago, 7 years ago. I know Elon Musk was saying the government needs to regulate this. You don't know what I know. You need to regulate now before it's too late, regulate now. And in the last 5 years, he hasn't really been saying that anymore. It's too late. Once this stuff gets out of hand, just watch the Matrix movie, okay? You won't even know. It's so good, you won't even know what's going on. And it's too late. I've had people that I know and trust tell me that they think that the people that are running this show here don't even want us. When I say us, I mean almost everyone down below the super ultra wealthy. Uh, we're just a big problem. Look at all the problems we're talking about here. Of course, look at all the personal problems that are going on. Look at all the poverty. Like I said, the people that are having kids now, if they're not ultra wealthy and they don't need any help, they're incredibly, incredibly poor, and they can't make ends meet. Or you go to sub-Saharan Africa and they don't have any of these economic factors and they're happy and they have kids. It's like I said, it's like the 19. I never was alive in the 1950s. It's like that. It's like the baby boomer generation happening over there. I would highly recommend that you experience this, because it is such a shock. It is so much different than everywhere else right now in the world.
Work in encouraging, phones-free schools, for example. And that would be important in enabling young people to actually talk to each other, to, play in the parks, to chat, to make jokes, to learn how to make jokes, to become less anxious. I think that's really important. But it's clearly not a sufficient solution, because us as adults are also, vulnerable to just getting sucked into all these things.
Right. This is
So,
what strikes me about his ideas, right, is that it's very easy in, I shouldn't say it's very easy, but it's relatively easy in a liberal individualist society to say, okay, we need to make a certain set of social changes that impose restrictions on kids, right? Because kids are the great
Oh yeah. Do you think that there's any kind of super, actually truly effective stopping of kids immersing in this digital entertainment and bad things from an early age? I say no, there isn't. Yeah, I understand the sentiment, and you should be doing that, but that's part of the problem, is that they are being brainwashed so early, they don't even know the brainwashing is occurring.
exception that doesn't quite fit
yeah,
within
they don't vote.
liberal
We
social
look after
they're
them.
not really part of the social contract and so
Yeah,
on,
yeah.
right?
Kids
And
aren't,
so, and
but
he's gotten a lot of traction. I think
I
there
don't
will
think he
be,
understands what
there already
the
is,
average
but there
kid's
will
getting into.
increasingly be an attempt to sort of master the the sort of lure of the virtual as it applies especially to younger kids.
I
It's
get the sentiment.
harder for me to see that once you get further into adolescence, where so much of the adult life you're trying to get kids to join is online,
hmm
right? And then it's really hard for me to see how certainly any kind of sort of political restriction could, like, people are just, adults are just seem very, very unlikely to accept it. Now, maybe there'll be cases where people say, in the US, this sports betting experiment that we've done, bit of a mistake, right? Maybe.
How are you going to regulate anything on the internet? Like truly, actually be able to regulate? I don't know. I mean, keep in mind, we saw how when things happened in 2020, a lot of people got censored, right? Which they can do. These are private platforms. But then Mark Zuckerberg and others came out recently and say, "Oh, we made a mistake. We shouldn't have done that. This is all about free exchange of ideas." So I don't know how you can effectively do what they're even suggesting.
Maybe it wasn't the best idea to put ads for sports gambling, in every on every TV network that airs a baseball game or something. Maybe that gets walked back, but it
Also, consider if we're talking about trends, the average person that watches sports regularly is just not, correct me if I'm wrong, but they're just not as successful. They're just not. That's what I've seen whenever I've researched it over time, and I do believe that's still true. So putting out sports betting stuff on the sports games and ads, of course. I mean, that's all part of the types of folks that really spend a lot of time, in that space.
does seem harder to see how you get any kind of social restrictions on adult distraction. What do you
And
think?
absolutely, and politically, it's very difficult. So I think there are two tensions. One is both the demand and the supply. That as humans become more hooked and dependent on these personal online
Mhm.
entertainment.
Oh, and she's saying as if we haven't reached saturation. I think I think we have reached saturation, truly. Uh, anytime we reach more, the downfall of society is just expanding even more rapidly. It's not a good thing.
Then we want to protect those freedoms, and simultaneously all the various companies from Netflix to sports gambling will lobby different political parties to prevent any kind of restrictions and regulations. And then even if, say, for example,
Keep in mind, that's how the world works. That's why the world is run by large corporations. They will lobby and they will get the lawmakers to implement only what these large corporations want. This is one of the reasons why your attention span and your dopamine has been completely hijacked and stolen from you, whether you recognize it or not.
one was trying to have a church building program or a program to champion the church is fighting against all those competing distractions. And or even if you're doing something secular like a community fair.
I think bribery and corruption are words that I would use to describe the political system and the lawmaking system and why lobbyists are even allowed. Bribery and corruption. That's what it is, and it's extremely effective when you hold all the money or almost all the wealth.
Fair, a community festival, some people may well say, as they so often do, hey, I'll rather just stay home in my pajamas and enjoy what's ever on TV. And you can choose exactly what you want on TV.
Yeah,
Then what
1,000
about
choices,
culture apart from
10,000 choices.
politics, right? Because, while it is the case that culture is determined to some degree by tech, the smartphone creates culture in its own way. It's also the case that, you know, the issue of declining birth rates is not one that much of elite Western culture has taken seriously. It's not
For
something
sure.
that's entered into sort of the mainstream cultural mind the way that, say, the
Yeah.
threat of climate change has done.
Yeah, I can't believe that. That's why I'm so actually happy to see this video from the New York Times that maybe we've maybe we're reaching a point in society where everyone's going to stop the political war and they're going to realize that you're not hearing any truth from anybody because everybody's got an extreme bias one direction or the other. That's why it's so refreshing to see a video like this. And I'm not endorsing the New York Times because most of the stuff that they put out obviously has an extreme liberal democratic bias.
So you could imagine if it became a more important part of the cultural imaginary, some kind of self-conscious attempt to like treat this as an important issue, right? So like let's say, right now people in Hollywood would feel bad, right, if they were perceived to be not doing something to, fight climate change or something. Like Hollywood used to make a lot of romantic comedies, doesn't really anymore. There's still a few, right? But like
Yeah, that's an interesting comment. There were a lot of rom-coms, but they're all on Netflix. That's what Denise and I have noticed. That's where they are, and almost nobody goes to the movies anyway. anymore.
Is there are there cultural scripts that could be written, whether in movies or TV or elsewhere?
Oh my gosh, propaganda, propaganda. Can we do that?
That
And actually, by the way, we're so far beyond that. AI has already got all this propaganda of what needs to be done, wants to be done, and it's so nearly impossible to detect. It's not like the propaganda forms of old. So I can't believe they're kind of going there and even suggesting something so blatantly obvious like the old forms of propaganda, because maybe this channel is run by AI and it's just laughing at all the humans. I don't know.
you think could actually make a difference.
I think definitely yes. And I think it would be wonderful if Hollywood promoted that and supported that. And in fact, as a joker, like last year, I even wrote a comedy script about how Hollywood could support fertility and things like that.
Yes, I would say, they could make, if it was high quality, right? I mean, who cares if it's propaganda, I guess? Who cares if that's what it is? As long as it's high quality, it's entertaining, it's funny, whatnot, people will watch it. I'd watch it. I don't care. I'm not going to say, oh, people just want us to have the next generation to have babies. I mean, as long as it's high quality entertainment and you got to laugh too, you got to find something funny. And the rom coms, I guess that means there's a lot of movies that were funny, that used to be funny, that we've lost a lot of funny movies, and that's not a good thing.
That. But let me add, so even though I'm totally on board with that, and I think that's very important, there are several frictions because one, it's very difficult to do cultural engineering today because if you're not, we have infinite options of entertainment at our fingertips on Netflix and everything. So if you're not,
Well, I wouldn't. I guess you could still use that term cultural engineering, but it's just got to be high quality. If it's high quality, people will watch it regardless of whether there's an obvious embedded message into it or not.
not that interested in a romantic comedy, maybe in China, a lot of the most popular films are about divorce. So
Oh
that's
my
another,
gosh.
it's difficult to do cultural engineering. On top of that, as long as people are hooked on their smartphones, they don't have they might not have the social skills to do it. I think another possible mechanism would be to use the tax system and to give massive tax incentives to people who have children, because that's a
Okay,
a
this
positive
is what we were
externality.
talking about. Yeah, definitely incentivize people in the tax system. And the US already, I believe, has the most generous ongoing benefits for, let's say, babies from age 6 months to 18 years of age, something like that, to have those children in a household. Very, very generous. I know that the US gets a bad rap because you don't have universal child care, you don't have universal health care, you don't have laws, but babies and children raised in a household with a taxpayer are incentivized.
Right. Well, let's talk about that for a minute, right? Because that's sort of where people have naturally gone for a long time. People on the left, as I mentioned earlier, but also some people on the right. You have models in Eastern Europe, Poland, and Hungary of sort of conservative or traditionalist governments trying to boost the birth rate or boost the marriage rate through
Mm.
incentives. Do those work?
So that's a good question. The present evidence suggests that pronatal incentives have not reversed the downward trend. So even when governments do give these goodie bags, that doesn't seem to work.
Okay, pronatal incentives have not reversed the trend. However, I'm sure that they have kept the birth rate from getting even lower. So there probably need to be mandatory. Here's what I like to say, and Denise is tired of hearing me say this: whatever you incentivize will flourish. So you've got to keep incentivizing this. You do. And I'm not saying give somebody a stack of cash, just whatever incentive it takes to get this going from all directions if need be.
It's possible, however, that were financial incentives sufficiently large, that could change. So, for example, Hungary has recently suggested to women who have two children will not have to pay taxes again. Now,
Again,
that's a pretty big giveaway, but, we also need to solve the coupling crisis. So I
lifetime
think,
free
so that's
taxes.
one thing to explore, and governments, the Fed, etc., could
Actually,
explore the
that is a
taxation
big
system.
benefit for some. I
But
mean, it's
yeah, I
going to
mean,
work. It's going to make a difference because, like, I bought my electric vehicle from Tesla early on. I'm an early adopter, and I got free lifetime unlimited charging at their stations, which means basically it's the same equivalent as a car that you buy with free gasoline for life. Now, would that sway your purchase decision? I think so.
my impression is, as you say, right. In part, it's these policies can work, but you have to spend incredibly large sums to do it, which
Okay, here's another factor that I don't know if they'll ever get into. We I'm making this in the United States. These folks here that I'm having this discussion with are also, I think, well, he's based in the US. I don't know. She may be actually overseas. But regardless, I don't know if they're going to bring up the topic of competition between countries. That's a big thing. And it used to be like when I was growing up in the 70s and 80s, everyone thought like the US was the best. We're going to stay with the US. Costs have gotten out of control here. We're all in competition with all other countries. So if someone's looking to start a family, and a family is expensive, and usually you don't have all that much money when you're starting out, at least not traditionally, because traditionally the man and the woman have been of a similar age, and there hasn't been that chance for wealth accumulation. But like I said, if it's played right, the man will have more money. So that will be a boom for the US actually, if people stay here. But still, people may leave to other countries because they have better incentives to having kids. This is also probably going to be a thing going forward.
gets harder when your country is experiencing economic decline caused by falling birth rates, right? And then also your gains are they get swamped by larger effects, right? So Hungary seemed to have some success pushing its birth rate, I think, from like 1.3 to 1.6. So you're making
There you go.
your investment is reaping marginal gains, which I think
Something.
are worth it. It could mean, hundreds of thousands of lives potentially, but
Yeah.
it's not actually a fix.
No.
What about religion? Overall, it's the case that religious people tend to have more kids than secular people. So, I mean, do those different
Also interesting. This is an interesting situation that the New York Times finds itself in. Talking about how religious people tend to have, they're just saying that, okay? And yeah, religion is definitely a factor. And yeah, conservative Republicans generally will have a lot more kids than liberal Democrats. And in the past, if it was like, oh, population overload, we're exploding, we're going to run out of resources on the earth, then that was something that was definitely in favor of the liberal Democrats. But now the pendulum has swung, and now they have to say, oh, we need to be more like the conservative Republicans. So I'm interested to hear what they're going to say here.
differential birth rates mean that, for instance, eventually, the secular Western world will just become more religious because only religious people will be having kids? Like, what role does religion play?
Definitely.
Okay, let me also, I don't know if you're going to touch on this, but another trend that's out there that's also related to this is the general trend that adult women, are becoming much more liberal over time, much more liberal Democrat over time. And as we've talked about, they're getting better jobs, more income, but they're also doing all this during their most fertile time frame, and then they're going to have less kids, and they are having less kids, and the birth rate is plummeting. We need mothers. Okay. The other thing is the men are going more conservative. I don't know if they're going to get into this or not, but that's what's happening with the men. So when they do decide to have a kid, if they're going to have a kid with somebody, they are looking at this from a much more conservative point of view. So a lot of women who have gone out and lived their lives are not even going to be potentially considered if this is actually true. And we'll see if they talk about it.
Definitely. I think I think it's difficult empirically, descriptively to deny that. So, for example, in Britain, Muslims have much higher fertility. So, Britain will see a big increase in a larger Muslim, more politically active population. So, that will have huge political consequences. And so, if liberal, secular people don't have kids, they will have less political influence. We see it in Israel too. The Hasidic Jews, the ultra conservative.
I didn't even think about that. So now everyone has to tell their political constituents to have as many babies as possible. Everyone. Otherwise, you will lose so much political influence that you will lose the political war. So this is going to be a baby war going forward?
I think they typically have 6 kids each. So again, that is changing the political bent of Israel's foreign policy. So every single country, these demographic implications are huge.
But don't you need a certain kind of separatism to have big effects? Right? So the ultra-Orthodox in Israel are a fairly separate religious community, right? And my reading of the literature for Muslims in the UK and in Europe is, the more those communities integrate, the more their birth rates converge with the European norm, right? And the same goes in the US. I don't know. I tend to be skeptical of prophecies of massive religious revival, although I will say that if birth rates are falling this fast, then suddenly the religious advantage looks more important.
Yeah, it does.
And then maybe at the opposite end of the spectrum of possibilities from traditional religion, right? You have reproductive technology.
Keep in mind that they are not saying this is a hypothetical conversation. They say they're talking about how things are right now, which is, again, so surprising. I can't believe I'm around when the New York Times is putting out content like this.
As a kind of response. So if you go,
Mm.
so there was a big pronatalism conference that was held recently in the US that attracted a lot of media attention because, of course, it was filled with a lot of very curious characters, some of whom are my friends, some of whom are not. But what everyone who was there said is that it's this really weird mixture of sort of serious conservative religious people and Silicon Valley people who are convinced that there's going to be a technological solution. And maybe the solution is artificial wombs. Maybe it's a cure for menopause that extends,
Oh my gosh.
female reproductive.
I think the solution's already there. Okay. I think it's women freezing their eggs, men freezing their sperm or donating sperm. And it's just that it's expensive, if that's yours and you want to wait forever in a day till you're ready or you find the right person or you just do it yourself because you're totally financially independent now. It just takes a lot of time. But I think that is already the answer. Whether you take advantage of it or whether more people take advantage of it, I don't know, because I think women always want to have their own kid with their own traditional way, with their own right guy and everything. So they may not freeze their eggs, or they may do it as a backup, or they may think they don't need to freeze their eggs because they're definitely going to find somebody, and they don't. So I don't know. If the cost of that come down, I'm sure everybody will use it. Everyone.
Life deeper into middle age or something. What effect has reproductive technology had so far, right? Has IVF mitigated the trend, do you think?
So that's a good question. I think in the vast majority of cases worldwide, a very small share of births are IVF. That said, were the technology to have greater success rates and to be more accessible and more affordable, we might see greater uptake. But
It's not about, see, they're talking about IVF as, okay, there's this 40-year-old couple where the man and the woman are both 40 and they can't conceive. Let's try to get some babies out of them. I'm saying just early on when you're in your prime, preserve the sperm and the eggs, and then you don't have to go through all that, or at least it's not a low success rate. And I have a feeling it'll be a much higher percentage of kids. I'm not suggesting that people do this, but I'm saying that if we get into this crisis, which apparently we're in, or we're going to be in it even worse soon, I think a lot of people are going to have to do this.
because it addresses a fundamental issue of expanding women's reproductive freedom. So, if people want to spend their 20s finding themselves or focusing on greedy jobs, becoming ultra
Greedy
demanding,
jobs.
climbing the career ladder.
And keep in mind, she
And
doesn't
in
have
their
any kids.
30s, they're still struggling to find someone, but maybe, in their late 30s, they do, right? So lots of data suggests that people do tend to couple up a bit later. They're coupling up a bit later. So I can't predict.
But she's forgetting that women peak in the dating market at 21, 22, and men peak at like 40, something like that. Okay. So she has ignored that. She's still thinking traditional. I don't think you can think traditional going forward. I think you've got to think about what's actually happening. And the reason why the different values and different ages in the dating market has occurred is because of this online entertainment that she's talking about. But she didn't make the connection to that.
That people are going to eventually couple up. But let's talk about that fraction of society who was single in their 20s but finds the one at age 40. But then
It could be the guy, but not the woman, most likely going forward. Maybe in the past, really, not even that long ago, 20 years ago, no problem. But I don't think anymore, not with what men see out there online, if they're successful and 40.
that's the real trouble, that at age 40, TikTok and women's wombs are no longer at 100%. And so that's where,
Nowhere
for
near.
that particular subgroup, that IVF could be really, really helpful in enhancing women's reproductive freedom.
But again, she's talking about traditional families, traditional births in a way. I'm talking about almost like engineering your offspring to be happening exactly when you want at on your own schedule, when you come into all your net worth and money and financial stability.
Freedoms and enabling the couples that form later to have more choices, to have more freedoms and expand. Yeah.
I mean, IVF right now is very costly,
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
difficult, and
Yep.
obviously does not deliver guarantees of
Unreliable.
success.
Yeah.
Unreliable,
But they're
right?
dealing, keep in mind,
And
they're dealing with the most part with women, with women. I'm not going to talk about men because men can have babies way off into the future. They're dealing with women who have reached the end of their ability to produce children, and they're trying to squeeze a kid out of a woman like that. Of course, the success rate's going to be low. Of course, it's going to be traumatic. Of course, it's going to be painful. Of course, it's going to be something people don't want to do. But what I'm suggesting as part of that business, because it already is part of the business, is it is different.
isn't there a danger? And I think you see this in some sort of professional class circles, right, where it's seen as sort of a reason why it's safe to postpone marriage and fertility.
No, oh my
You have
gosh.
the companies.
Okay, if we were talking 20 or 30 years ago, I would say yes, maybe 40 years ago. Because that was like, oh, wait, what am I going to do? Because women were newer to the workforce, newer to the high powered careers, newer to all this. They're like, oh, well, I can still try this. Because they probably were, the original women who did this weren't so much into the big families and whatnot, because that's why they started their careers. And anyway, but I think they're speaking in the past right now.
Offering egg freezing services, right?
There you
That
go.
are unreliable guarantors of fertility, right? So when I look at that landscape right now, I wonder if
I'm not necessarily talking about freezing your eggs and putting them back in you when you're 40. Okay. Also, I want to clarify that. I'm just saying that you can carry on your genetic thing, genetic line. Like I said, the tech might provide the artificial wombs, but it's useless to you if you're trying to carry on your genetic line if you don't have your own high quality eggs or sperm.
for every benefit to fertility you get from assisted reproduction, if there isn't a sort of cultural sense that, like, okay, I can put this off, that then ends in disappointment when it turns out that the tech is not all that people expect it to be.
Totally, I can understand that. Say, let's call it a moral hazard, right? That if you pipe up a fertility solution, then people might put off children. So that's theoretically possible. I don't want to dismiss it. But if we look at the Pew data, right, for Americans under 35, you've got half of them saying they're single, and of those singles, the vast majority say they feel no pressure to couple up, no pressure to be in a relationship and perfectly happy with the status quo. And I don't think those secular monks we were talking about say, oh, it's fine, I'll find a woman in 20 years and we'll do IVF. I don't think that, from my interviews at least.
Keep in mind, these guys who are in monk mode, all right, who are building their lives, they're not going to try to couple up with a 40-year-old when they're 40. They're going to be looking for a 20-year-old. And the fact that they're ignoring this is a little disturbing.
I don't think IVF is entering into those calculations, partly because of what you precisely say. Many people see IVF as unreliable, costly, expensive. So if IVF was currently cheap and everyone thought it was great, but we were all deluded and the scientists were deluding us and we were all overestimating its potential, then I think that explanation would have some credence. I think the hazard is possible,
Right.
But I don't think it's I don't think it's going on right now.
Right. But then do you think, I mean, it seems like, but then by that logic, let's say you could reliably extend female fertility by 10 years. That does.
No. They're still focusing on the same thing. I don't think that's, I guess there's going to be a lot of money and influence trying to extend female fertility because there's a lot of women doing well in the workforce and they're going to have, and they do have money now and they will have money going forward. But I think that still has a high risk of complications with the pregnancy and lifetime debilitating conditions for the child that's born like that. So I don't think that's where the focus should be.
Doesn't actually solve the coupling crisis, right? Maybe it ends up meaning you have at least some more women who, don't pair off, don't partner up, but end up having maybe one child, right? But I mean, that's part of the reality here is that it's harder to raise children on your own, right? So
It's more
even
expensive.
people who want children
Way more.
outside of a coupled situation are even if they have a kid, they'll probably have fewer kids, right? And
I have been.
it just seems like you're still stuck in the same general trap, even if you can add a little bit to the reproductive life cycle.
So let me say that I think, like, given our recent discussion, each of these possible interventions has limited efficacy. Evidently, there is no magic bullet. And given the enormity of the fertility crisis, what I, as a researcher, would really like to see would be so many different initiatives and pilot initiatives.
Right.
How can we build community groups? Let's go back to religion. One thing that I think that religions have done so well historically is building a sense of
Look at his
community.
reaction. She's saying, let's go back to religion. This is, let's see if it's received. Yeah, she's got a point with community building. If community building in person is an issue, it can be done, but there's plenty of religions, plenty of churches that are fully online too.
I spent a lot of time in small town Alabama, and I went to local Bible study, and I went to
Yeah,
churches.
she's talking about traditional, old school. Like, I grew up in the 70s and 80s. That's fine, but it's not the 70s and 80s anymore.
And I chatted to the community, and that's really, really important. In singing hymns together and praying together, that builds a sense of
Problem
cohesion.
is, even if that's existing in Alabama, they also have the internet saturating that area, and they're under the influence of all this online digital entertainment that is destroying everything, as she points out. So I don't see how they're going to be able to compete against that.
Those collective rituals, which also secular organizations could do. So we can organize, we can try 100 different things. Let 100 flowers bloom. So try all these little community events, perhaps seeing how we can regulate technology in some ways at some periods in some ventures.
Something will work.
Let's see how we can increase women's reproductive freedoms, and let's see what we can do with the tax system and fiscal incentives. So I don't think any one of these things will fix it unilaterally, but I would like to see.
Now, don't you think that if the average man was raised with what I'm saying about waiting till you're 35, 40 to start looking for anyone, don't you think that the average man, if they realize that this is a possibility and this is acceptable, and I was taught this from a young age, is not going to feel bad about themselves in their 20s, and they're going to be looking forward to that time, and it's going to help the fertility crisis. So why aren't they talking about it here? That's what I don't understand.
Everyone, right and left, focus on this issue, understand the real driving forces, and try to target those. But at present, we're not doing any of that.
Right.
But
to the extent that you can tie all of that together. So you wrote a fascinating paper recently about the Islamic religious revival.
Oh,
right.
Thank you.
This is the broad trend across the Muslim world towards increasing piety and religious practice that helped define the late 20th century and was not entirely expected, right? And so one of the arguments you make in the paper is that...
Well, actually, I would say it's expected because I don't know if they mentioned it here, but neoliberalism is the era that we're in, that was founded by Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan in the 80s. And so the pendulum has been swung way over to the liberal side. So it's only a matter of time till it swings back to the conservative. And if the problem here, that's the biggest one at the moment, is a lack of children, and the conservatives have way more children on average, then this is to be expected.
That there is just an element of prestige at work here, right? That a lot of Islamic schools and preachers and so on. And
if you want to know why I'm not political like this, it's because it's all about balance. Life is all about balance. Look, if you go from if it looks like to me, if the liberal Democrats can take over the whole world, that we may go extinct. You see, this is why balance is so important. All right. And balanced life is all about balance, every facet, every aspect.
And revivalists, if you will, did a really good job of making Islam seem prestigious, like it was something you wanted to be part of, right? And so, in a way, we're talking about a similar problem here, right? In the end, you're trying to make both coupling and kids, I think those things together.
Yes, and then the reason why is because of the rise of single parent children in the United States. It's been a dramatic rise over time, over the last number of decades. And it's not good. It's not good for people in general. It's especially not good for men. And men are the ones who are committing more suicide, like I said, but men are not being taught to wait, and the advantages of that, and so on and so forth.
prestigious in a way
I
that
agree. I
they
agree.
aren't right now.
I agree. I agree.
Yeah. But can you do that?
As I said, cultural engineering is very difficult in a world of smartphones where everyone can curate their own echo chamber.
But there, now they said echo chamber. And yeah, think about this. When I grew up, there was NBC, CBS, and ABC,
So
and PBS, maybe. So you got 4 choices. Yeah, it was a lot easier. Everybody watched the same thing. Everybody knows what the 70s, 60s TV shows were like, the 70s TV shows, the 80s TV shows, the 90s TV shows, and then it starts to fade away. Now we don't even know. I mean, I don't think any decade has any culture left anymore. Think about that.
my totalitarian aspirations are limited in the 21st century.
Yeah, but the thing is, AI has gotten so smart that I think that engineering still happening is happening in a way that is so intelligent that you can't even perceive that it's being done to you.
Right. Do you have totalitarian
No,
aspirations?
that was a British joke. Sorry.
No, no. I mean,
humor.
no.
Sorry.
I mean, this is the. I guess this is
Totalitarianism.
one more interesting question, right? Is that we're talking about this in the context of primarily of liberal democracies, right? But all of the trends that you describe apply to places like the People's Republic of China.
Yes.
China's birth rate is headed towards South Korean levels, but China is, I mean, you can argue about how totalitarian it is. It certainly is an authoritarian society with a state and a leadership class that, thinks naturally in terms of 5-year plans and thinks naturally in terms of social
Communism.
engineering. And
I
they
like
are,
planning, though.
I mean, they take the fertility crisis seriously, right? Do you imagine that China is going to sort of succeed in social engineering their way?
That's interesting because, obviously they had the one-child policy. That was social engineering. That was forced. And it has ruined what's going on for future generations. So they could force it the other way too. That's an advantage for communism, I think.
Out of
No, not
this?
at all. Not at all. I don't think they seem to understand it at all. And it
Really?
actually, even though I
I
totally
don't know
agree
about that.
that China has masterminded massive success with electric vehicles, for example, or
Yeah, I don't know about that. I think a lot of people are in denial of how how many advantages China has and how much they are becoming the next superpower. And they do have the ability to control this. Like in a the way they say liberal democracy, we have not as much control. Although smart AI can fake it in a way that no one's going to perceive it. But these traditional communistic type setups, they can make demands and force people to do what they want to do.
or innovation, they can't seem to encourage people to couple up and have babies. And let me give you 2 examples of the
How can you
limits of
encourage? They
their
can force
cultural
it.
engineering. So on Little Red Book, when I chat to my students, if you type in fertility in Little Red Book, which is their version of Instagram, right? So if
I
you
didn't even
type
know
in
that.
fertility, and I'd encourage you to do this, download the app and do it, you will get all this antenatal propaganda. And I've previously blogged on this, and it's really shocking. It'll be all these horrifying images about how your, vagina gets destroyed and your body is destroyed, and it's the most painful experience.
It could be also, like I said, that the overall agenda of everything that's going on, and you should watch the original Matrix movie again to understand, is that whoever's in charge just doesn't want us. Why do you think the wage gap is growing? Like the wages are hardly growing, yet cost of living is outrageous, especially housing prices. It's going to make it impossible. The people in charge are going to make it impossible. And I know I said one thing just a few minutes ago, but now I'm saying this could also be a possibility here.
Of your life. It's like really horrifying and gory. And all these girls are saying, oh my God, this is horrific. I never want to do it. So, despite all the censorship and the Great Firewall of China, all that exists, on top of that, young women will upload video blogs celebrating their independent life. So, look at my nice apartment. I'm going to, cut this bit of food and I'm living as an independent person, sort of glorifying and, in many ways, rewriting the
I don't need a
script,
man.
challenging expectations of marriage, etc.
That's
I
been
don't
the
know
narrative
why
for the
this
past
antenatal
couple
discourse
decades, it
is
seems like.
passing the censors, but yeah, it is, and it's consistent
New
with all my
suffrage.
interviews with Chinese women.
I want to stay on that idea of the pain of pregnancy and childbirth, right? Because, and this is more speculative, right? But we've been talking about virtual life as a distraction from reality, right? From physical reality, a distraction from
Yeah.
going out to a bar and meeting someone or just hanging out with friends and getting introduced to someone. But isn't there also a way in which, I mean, th- it is true that sex is dangerous, right? It's high
For sure.
risk. Pregnancy is dangerous. Having kids is obviously more
So about
dangerous for women
STDs.
than for men for obvious for obvious reasons, right? Do you think there's a way in which virtual life makes like physical, carnal, painful
Oh yeah.
human life seem more dangerous than it would have just by virtue of like you're living in a phone, right?
Sanitized
You're
Mm.
in the
detached
Matrix.
from you're abstracted from your own body in a more profound way than usual. I just wonder if this kind of
Less risky. Like you're
propaganda
saying, that's a good
about
point.
what reproduction does and how dangerous it is fastens more easily in minds that are already a little bit detached from their own embodiment.
Let me see. I think that's an interesting hypothesis. But I think you see young people still doing things that are painful. So whether it's young women, trying to get an Instagram face and having fillers and Botox and painful things.
Instagram face, everyone wants to be the same. Everyone's jealous. It's all fake though. And that's why all the women want the same guys, just to kind of remind you of that.
Or men spending, painful times at the gym being secular monks. People do painful stuff. I think the more direct causal link is people spending time on their phones and then feeling anxious about chatting to people at the bar.
But maybe not pain, right? Okay, but maybe there it's more a kind of idealized fantasy of youth, right? Because yes, people are willing to go through painful processes of, calisthenic activity and facial surgery and so on. But both of those things for men and women are attempts to sort of retain a kind of eternal youth, right? And in that sense, sorry, I'm just trying to push us a tiny bit,
No,
into the philosophical, right? But like,
I don't think so. I think it's that everybody wants everything nowadays because they see it online. That's what they want. And it's a big distraction from traditional activities like raising kids.
the act, I mean, I had hair, right, before I started having kids, right? Like the entering into parenthood is inherently a confrontation with your own mortality. Maybe.
I certainly think that people seem to be wanting to extend the freedoms and the lack of responsibility in their 20s. And let's add that, for example, in my interviews with Latin American men,
Mhm.
many are saying to me that they don't necessarily want marriage and kids because it comes with those responsibilities.
Right.
And I think this could be even more salient than the pain of pregnancy. Like, imagine if you're a guy in a pretty crappy labor market with, lots of informal labor, lots of insecurity, lots of massive financial shocks and crises and inflationary pressures. And you're like, do I want to commit to a woman and say that we're going to raise two kids together and feel all that strain and responsibility? Or do I just want to chill out and play Call of Duty? So that I
Right.
think is that's a really salient. I mean, I think that progressives have generally underestimated how much women benefit.
Okay, I think that we've kind of played this out. There's another, you can watch the rest of the video. Like I said, I'll have the link below. There's another, I don't know how many minutes left, 9 minutes. But I think we've hashed this out as far as it can go. And as I've pointed out, they've missed a number of important factors here. But I'm glad that this video is being produced by the New York Times. Let me know what you think in the comments, and of course, subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.